to invite Josefina Lindblom from DG Environment to introduce you to levels. And Josefina has been leading the development of the framework on behalf of the Commission. Josefina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thanks everyone for organizing this webinar. I am Josefina Lindblom and I work at DG Environment. And as Judith just said, we have been working together very closely with DG Grow, colleagues in DG Grow as well on this one. Levels that I'm going to talk about today is a tool to assess and report sustainability performance in the building sector. So my first intervention here, we go through those points: what levels is, what it covers, how was it developed, and the benefits that we see with levels as well. Not just us, I should say, but most of all, or more importantly, the stakeholders that have been involved in developing this. So what is levels? Well, levels is a tool to report on sustainability for buildings. It takes, or it supports a holistic assessment of buildings, meaning that it covers the full life cycle from extraction of materials until the end of life. And it looks at several aspects of buildings beyond energy efficiency, which we are perhaps used to looking at more carefully. We are using a limited number of indicators. That is what makes it quite special compared to other tools existing on the market, trying to take this broader holistic approach. And of course, levels is voluntary. Levels has been developed with offices and housing in mind, and it is catering for new build and renovation, major renovation projects. It is not thought directly for existing buildings as such. We are targeting the mainstream market, and I think that's what makes it special compared to many other certification schemes, etc. And that is, of course, why we are using a limited number of indicators, as I just said, and I should stress that they are as much as possible based on existing standards as well. But it is also important to understand from the outset what Levels is not, I think. Levels is not an EU certification scheme, so there is no such thing as Levels Plus or Levels A or Levels Gold or something like that. We don't set EU benchmarks. It is a tool to assess and report on sustainability performance, but we are not using benchmarks and we are not certifying it from our side. We do hope, of course, that other organizations, or perhaps even member states, will choose to set their own benchmarks on some of those indicators that I will talk about later on, but these benchmarks will not come from the EU. Also, I want to stress that although we are not providing a certification scheme as such, we have worked very closely with a number of stakeholders, building professionals, during this process, of which we also had several of the big certificate schemes in Europe. And they have been very much involved in this work because they want to be able to use those indicators that we are suggesting in their schemes next to their larger set of indicators which are specific then for each individual certification scheme. So this means that even though Levels will not certify as such, it will have an indirect impact on certification in Europe because we can see already now actually how the Levels indicators are starting to be picked up by those important certification schemes. So what are the different areas that Levels is covering actually? On the three top here on this slide, you can see three different kinds of resources, use of resources, which Levels is covering and which are of course immediately or directly linked to environmental impact. So that's the full life cycle of energy. We have water use, and we have materials, and linked to that, of course, the issue with waste. Those are the first three ones. To say that when we started this work, we actually thought that that would be enough. We wanted to focus on the resource use. But we were very quickly convinced by building professionals and member states that in order to make this a really attractive tool for the mainstream market, we should also include other aspects which are more linked to the quality and the value of the building. And those are the three ones you see at the bottom. So that's health and comfort, it's resilience to climate change, and life cycle costing. So those are the 6 different areas we have, and to those 6 different areas we have indicators linked to them. Indicators. Now we have limited time here today, so I will not go through them, but I wanted to show you where they are, where you can find them easily, because I assume that you can have access to these slides afterwards. So just to say that on the left-hand side of this slide, you see these 6 areas, or the 6 macro objectives, as we actually call them, that I just mentioned to you. So it's basically energy, material, water, health and comfort, climate change, and cost and value. And then in the boxes next to them, you can see the indicators which link to them. But I will not go through them in detail now, but this is where you find them. Also, what happened during the development phase of levels was that we realized that we needed to actually provide not just one way of working with indicators, but 3 different ways, and we call them 3 different levels. So the first level is really targeting, I would say, the mainstream market, which is not used to assess the building performance or the sustainability performance of a building beyond energy efficiency, but wants to get started. These kinds of building projects, or the organizations dealing with those building projects, they may not have access to all very specific data that would be required to make a very precise assessment, but they still have some interesting stuff which can be used, and they can see how by using levels on the first, you can still see how different decisions that you take have an impact on the performance of the building, and how you can work to actually improve them. And then you have 2 other levels which you can use if you want to be more specific with your assessment, and even use it to optimize your design later on. Levels was developed between 2015 and 2017, and it was a huge collaboration between different groups of building professionals. It was a very interactive process, and we had several rounds of consultations. And that was, I think, the reason why I think it's a very good product. We started off with the macro objectives in the first year, and then in the second year, we decided, or we identified the indicators that would be linked to those macro objectives, as I just showed you. And then actually at the very last stage, during the public consultation, it became clear that we needed to provide different levels of working with the indicators. So I would say that everything that I've showed you so far is actually a clear outcome of the great interactive process that we've had with stakeholders. The benefits that we see with levels, and what we certainly hear from building professionals looking at it, is that it provides a common language. It is a simple entry point to something which can be quite complex, because buildings are complex products. With levels, it should be possible to influence decision-making along the life cycle, support the business case, which always needs data, obviously, and this is what levels can generate, but also to guide policy. We are in touch with a lot of member states, policymakers, which are interested in using levels for their different building policies. And we clearly see how this can complement initiatives. This is not sort of another certification scheme, as I said. It is a common language, and this is how it can complement existing stuff. This is part of our webpage, and I just wanted to show you that on that webpage you find the technical documentation, introduction to levels, but also how it works and how you can use the indicators more precisely, and you find it in 6 different languages. So to conclude, what I would like you to take away from this introduction is that it is a common language. It covers the full life cycle. We are really targeting the mainstream market with this one. It's not that we expect the mainstream market to suddenly perform fantastic buildings, but it is a way of getting aware of how you can improve and get better, even if you don't suddenly produce the best buildings, but how you can make steps forward. And I want to remind you again that it has really been developed by and for building professionals. Thank you.
Many thanks, Josefina. That's really interesting. While we're waiting for the audience to put some questions, I've got a couple of ones for you. We wondered how you see other EU institutions reference or integrate some of this work in their reporting formats.
Yeah, so for example, we have a lot of contacts with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which are keen on, of course they are funding lots of building projects in different parts of Europe and outside of Europe as well. And they are keen on, they have for a long time tried to sort of set their own sustainability standards and work with this concept when they are funding projects. But this has always been a bit ad hoc to them because they haven't found a suitable tool to work with. Some of those big certification schemes out there which do excellent work for the best performers, so to say, in the market, may not be the most suitable ones for other projects where you still would like to have a good feeling for how you could do a bit better than just any standard building project. So they are now looking at how to use levels, for example. We also have interest from the department here in Brussels, which are responsible for the Commission buildings, to look at how they could test levels and see how it would work, because they are, of course, managing lots of buildings here. So they are looking into this as well with great interest, followed our process during the development stage as well.
And it's worth noting that Levels is just reaching its piloting stage, which I mentioned before. There's an excellent question from someone from Alexander Delianis, if I pronounce his name correctly, from the audience. He says, hello and thank you for this presentation. If Levels does not set benchmarks, will there be a sort of database that can help highlight best practices?
Yes, that is an excellent question, and it is a question that I get quite often, and I understand there is a great interest in that. Now, the Commission does not foresee to set up a database as such. It is not something that the Commission normally does, and it would take a lot of resource, not just to set up, but to maintain, because that would have to be maintained, of course. But when I'm traveling around to different member states to discuss this tool with ministries, they are, very many of them see an interest from their side to put up such a national database, and perhaps it could also be sector actors who would see an interest in putting it up on a European level. But otherwise, I think it is something that is more likely to happen on the national level, actually.
Okay. And there's one more question, but we're actually running short of time, so we might have to save it for the questions at the very end, about the number of projects that are using Levels now. And it's a really good question for when we discuss the test phase. We're going to see two other experts, and the first one is going to be Esfand Berman, Dr. Esfand Berman, who's a lecturer at the Bartlett School of Environment, Energy and Resources. Esfand has studied more buildings in more detail than any building performance professional I know, and I know a few. Today he's going to tell us about the benefits of a holistic approach to building performance data, which means what data to collect and for what purpose, and what does it tell us. Esfand, please fire away.
Thank you, Judith. Before I start, just to check, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Right. Hello, everyone. Many thanks to Josefina and Judith for the great presentations. This presentation is really an overview of the interim results of an ongoing research project And this research project entails a number of case studies, including case studies in housing sector and offices, and we have already registered a couple of case studies for the levels testing phase. So just go through the results, and the idea is basically to show what data can basically tell us, the insights that data can provide us when we go beyond the standard level of, if you like, monitoring, the conventional level of monitoring, and try to look into disaggregated energy data, but also indoor environmental quality. So, the idea is basically to provide a holistic approach to energy and indoor environmental quality with special focus on indoor air quality, which is quite topical at the moment in the UK and many European countries as well, as a result of outdoor pollution. But I'll also show you one example to signify the importance of internal sources of pollution as well. A couple of case studies, available data that we collected from this project and relevance to levels. Judith already referred to the problem of unintended consequences of energy efficiency policies, and this has been the focus of a number of our research projects. Overheating problems, for example, in airtight new buildings, problems to do with indoor air quality, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is relatively quick wins as a result of implementing energy efficiency measures might as well bring some unintended consequences of some losses in indoor environmental quality. So the idea is to view energy as the input to the environmental systems of a building and indoor environmental quality as the output. So we really need to take into account the total performance of buildings. This is one of our case studies. It's registered for level testing phase. And what we did here in this example, this case was quite important for us because the building has been subject to performance contracting. Again, performance contracting was touched on by Judith in her presentation. And the idea was basically to try and guarantee a certain level of performance, energy performance within this contract, to tackle the problem of the energy performance gap, which is quite endemic in the industry, the discrepancy between actual operation of buildings and design intent. So from process point of view, this is a very important case for us, and we would like to see the results. The asset rating or energy performance certificate of this building was A-rated, and the idea was to have display energy certificate, which is basically the operational rating of the building based on the actual data, A-rated as well by the second year of operation. Now what happened, as you can see, they didn't quite achieve that. They got a B-rated operational rating, which is quite good compared to the rest of the building stock, but there are still some lessons to be learned. And as a matter of fact, the main contractor in charge of this project has quite recently delivered another project in the UK, and in that project, again, they had this operational rating of A as target, and they managed to achieve. So it's a learning curve. It's a very good project in the sense that there are very useful lessons to be learned and to scale up for wider application in the industry. So what we did here in this project, we had access to total energy use per fuel, but also disaggregated energy use, high granularity. We had half-hourly data you can see on the right-hand side of this slide in terms of electrical demand, but also monthly, yearly data. And as you can see on the left-hand side top graph, for example, you have energy budgets. So the tight budget set out at design stage with the building, and then the actual operation of the building year 1 and year 2. And based on that, this data, the designer and contractors highlighted the energy end users that basically should be the prime target for energy savings, namely heating, lighting, and auxiliary, because you can see significant discrepancy in terms of these end users compared to the energy budget. And as you can see, in the second year of operation, they managed to reduce these end users significantly, although there's still an element of gap, and they're still working on the project in the third and fourth year as well. Also, net electrical demand of the building is quite telling, because usually we would expect to see a so-called bell-shaped curve, but as a result of a very large PV installation in this building, you don't see that daytime peak electrical demand, which tells us that the PV installation has been quite effective, and they really need to tackle the baseline demand of the building to further reduce energy consumption. So this will inform further energy saving scenarios and optimization activities. So in terms of energy performance, they are doing very good, if not, 100% in line with the design target. But what we uncovered in this building was issues around indoor environmental quality, which were not quite guarded within that performance contract, unfortunately. So, for example, the CO2 concentration level on one large open plan zone of this office building were frequently above 1500 ppm, which is not deemed to be acceptable as a result of some malfunctioning sensors. So they had natural ventilation, automated vents, but the automated vents were not functional because the CO2 sensors had some technical issues. Also, on the right-hand side, you can see that PM2.5 the concentration level of microparticles were frequently higher than WHO limits, the World Health Organization limits in other zones. So we came across some interesting issues around air quality in this building. Given the building is subject to performance contracting, this was quite insightful. Also out of range values, and I was quite happy to see within the levels framework going through the spreadsheet, and the KPIs developed, that out of range values are quite important in terms of levels. And that's exactly what we try to do here. This is the outcome of thermal comfort study we did. For example, you can see in terms of temperatures, on the second and third floor of the building, the temperatures are relatively, they're lower than the acceptable range for office buildings, which definitely helps them in terms of the heating energy budgets, but it's not good from thermal comfort. So you can see the conflict between energy and thermal comfort, and then we can quantify these out of range values in terms of total percentage of temperature or relative humidity outside thermal comfort range. In terms of air quality, we followed the detailed analysis carried out as part of 68 of International Energy Agency Energy in Buildings and Communities program, which has highlighted major indoor and outdoor sources of pollutions and contaminants of interest, which could have high concentration levels in low energy buildings. You can see these, a number of them are sourced by outdoor sources of pollution like microparticles, nitrogen dioxide, also benzene. Some of them are predominantly internally driven. You have a number of VOCs here. So we captured all these species within this project. And the case studies, this is our office building subject to performance contracting, natural ventilated strategy on right-hand side, indoor, left-hand side, outdoor, you can see the louvers, manually operable windows, and at higher level automated vents. So what we managed to capture by means of data collection here was quite an interesting interplay between concentration level of CO2s, which are conventionally, CO2 levels are conventionally used in the industry as a proxy for indoor air quality. However, you can see a nice interplay between CO2 and other contaminants. Here, you can see the NO2 results. The same applies to PM2.5. The same zone, which had problems in terms of automated vents, with high levels of CO2 level close to 2,500 here. The peak is around 2,500. You can see it has the least NO2 levels and also PM2.5. And this brings the opportunity to optimize control strategies based on outdoor pollution and not necessarily and only based on indoor concentration level of a species like CO2, for example. So this brings the idea of optimization of natural or indeed any ventilation strategy based on health indicators and various proxies of indoor air quality as opposed to a single proxy like CO2. Another case study is, this one is not an office building, but still it's quite important to signify the issue. It's a hospital building that we monitor, full mechanical ventilation. You can see the stark contrast. In terms of CO2 levels are quite low. The maximum level is 800 ppm. Compared to the previous case, it's fantastic. However, the question is CO2, is it the only proxy? According to the industry, mainstream, projects in the industry, they only monitor CO2. But let's proceed. If you monitor also microparticles, PM2.5, again, fantastic air quality if you take PM2.5 as proxy. You can see the indoor PM2.5s are significantly lower than outdoor, almost negligible, and below the standard limits. Great. because you have high-grade filtration within the air handling unit. It's mechanical ventilation strategy. However, if you take into account another important proxy, another source of pollution coming predominantly from outside, notably from diesel engines, now we have this problem at this level, as I'm sure you're aware. In terms of NO2, you can see there's no control measure for NO2. So indoor NO2 levels closely follow outdoor levels. And that's the main issue in this building. So despite the fact that it's a hospital building, full mechanical ventilation, great filtration, but particle filtration cannot control NO2. You really need a chemical process. So for example, in this case, we really need activated carbon filters to make sure we can reduce NO2 level. As things stand, there's no control over the NO2, and NO2 levels are very frequently higher than WHO limits of 21 particle per billion. So this gives you an idea how, if you go beyond one or two contaminants and try to capture the whole spectrum of critical contaminants, you can identify problem issues and formulate improvement opportunities or optimization opportunities. Just one final point in terms of internal sources of pollution, which could be quite relevant to architects in terms of material selection. We monitor formaldehyde concentration levels in all case studies, and notably in our residential buildings. Very often formaldehyde levels are significantly higher than the WHO limits, almost 3 times, as you can see in a couple of examples, couple of flags here. So benzene and formaldehyde levels higher than WHO limits or Annex 68 of International Energy Agency, which is underpinned by WHO limit. So in terms of source control, material selection, and the VOC levels and VOC emission factors of the material, the industry is not quite there. And the evidence emerging from this project is actually reinforced by other studies coming from Annex 68 of International Energy Agency program as well. So the entire statistical sample that we hold for Europe and North America, formaldehyde concentration levels are actually higher than the standard limit. So this is a major issue that should be taken into account at design stage for every project in terms of engaging suppliers and material selection, but also more broadly in terms of specifying stringent limits for the suppliers and manufacturers. So very briefly, to conclude, energy performance contracting has proved very effective to close the energy performance gap. However, the suggestion is also to take into account environmental performance gap and move towards energy plus environmental performance contracting. In terms of outdoor sources of pollution, there are opportunities to improve the existing ventilation strategies in the industry to optimize health and well-being in addition to energy. And in terms of VOC source control, and more importantly, the most important VOC in terms of health impact is formaldehyde. We really need to strengthen the existing standards, but also existing delivery methods, and make sure the industry is quite there in terms of reducing the emission factors for various VOCs, including formaldehyde. Relevance to level, I've already touched on it. We are going to basically upload our data that we gathered for 2 case studies from our research program during the testing phase of levels, and hopefully we'll be able to give feedback, more structured feedback in terms of consistency between data capture and level structure later on in another opportunity, maybe another webinar. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm ready to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ehsan. That was wonderfully insightful. I just wondered very quickly, while we wait for any questions from the audience, so much detailed data might look a bit scary to architects who tend to be more generalists. To what extent do we think, especially in the context of the development of the Smart Readiness Indicator, to what extent do you think it might be possible for smart equipment and services to report on this kind of data in a more user-friendly way, so that lay people might get their teeth into this as well?
Well, that's a very good question, and to be honest with you, we still have a significant gap in the industry in terms of sensing, monitoring, and control of these devices. Having said that, there are very good equipment now in the field that could at least give us a holistic view of total VOC, if not individual VOC, so TVOC, which is very useful to give us an indication of the trends, performance trends. CO2, of course, is established in the industry. In terms of microparticles, again, there are very good sensors that could be integrated into the existing control strategy of new building, because again, levels focus on understanding primarily new buildings. So we could incorporate relatively cost-effective microparticle sensors into the BMS system. So at least in terms of the most, I think best thing to do to address your question is to highlight the most important contaminants in terms of health impact. And if that's the case, you really need to go for microparticles, specifically PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide in terms of outdoor pollution, and even total VOC in terms of indoor pollution would be enough, because it gives you a very good indication of performance trends. So in terms of these basic and at the same time key contaminants, there are sensors that could be incorporated in the BMS system and give us feedback alongside energy consumption. I think this is feasible and manageable.
Fantastic, Espan, many thanks. I know there is a lot of discussion about when these sensors are going to be inside each of our mobile phones. Certainly, it makes me worried about our indoor environment here. And I think someone raised that that perhaps there is a need to better link to cognitive scientists to communicate the effect on building occupants, and some of that research is ongoing already. But without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Peter Andreas Satrup, who is a senior advisor at the Danish Association of Architectural Firms. And Peter Andreas will illustrate in more detail the potential that levels presents to architects. Peter Andreas?
Thank you very much, Judith. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me? Fantastic. And now I just need control of the slides.
Yeah, perhaps you could speak up a little bit or turn your volume up a tiny bit.
Okay, I'll do that. I need control of the slides, please. I don't have control of the slides. If you could, please. There you go. Well, there you go. Fantastic. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to give a talk here, and I'm very delighted to tell a little bit about how we see the potentials of levels. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm heading sustainability at the Association of Danish Architectural Firms, which represents the commercial interests of architects across Denmark. We cover approximately 90% of the market, but let's go to levels. We really think that there's a very high urgency in making sustainability services more mainstream. We are definitely able to deliver. We have a lot of architectural companies that basically can do consultancies with all these aspects of sustainable architecture, but we do miss incentives in the market so that our clients actually ask for these services. And this is where levels and voluntary benchmarking reporting we didn't get with the revised EBPD. I think that we have opportunities to create with for ourselves with adopting levels as the European approach. I have a problem. I need to shift the slides. I don't have control. Could you please pass me the board? I need to have control of the slides, please. There you go. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about sustainability in architectural design and some approaches to that. I have a terrible lag in the presentation. There you go. Okay. It's like, yeah, okay, sustainability. In Denmark, we have adopted the DGNB standards as a system for high-level sustainability certification. And here you have a comparison between what do you achieve with the basic building regulations to the left and the DGNB system to the right. And as you see, there's a difference, which is on 2 dimensions. You have the number of value dimensions that you actually cover in the system, and also what are the benchmarks. Obviously, with the high-level DDMB system, the benchmarks are quite a bit higher than the building regulations, and they cover quite a few more value dimensions. So the problem with that approach is that the high-level certification systems, they cover sort of a tiny fraction of the market. And basically, most clients, they are content with just living up to the building regulations. So the really important question is, how do we actually get the mainstream to achieve more? And that's where we hope that levels come in. Here you go. So, and that means that what we need to achieve really is an intermediate system which has sort of a lower complexity than the high-level certification systems has, but and which is achievable with less time and of course less cost to the client, but where we do achieve a high degree of value. So this intermediate system, what you see is sort of in between the building regulations and the sustainability certification system. This is really where we see levels come in. And we also think that this is really important because levels can generate a common language, and we think that we can integrate this with the building regulation sort of as in a voluntary sustainability class. This could be a really efficient way to motivate clients and consultants to achieve more sustainability in the building environment. So just to discuss, what is really the opportunity. I think that we need to discuss values in a more general terms, and how sustainability in architectural design, what is it really? We have an effort at the moment among Danish architects in documenting the value that we actually produce for society, for clients, of course, because we're always encountering skepticism. So what kind of values does architecture really produce? Is it, social cohesion, in the built environment? Is it about generating generalist spaces, lots of daylight access, and so on? And of course, this is a very famous instance by Bjarke Ingels architects, which is very popular with architects. You can also point to energy efficiency. This is one of the first near zero energy buildings by Henning Larsen architects, and where we use the voluntary energy classes as first from the first issue of the EBPD. We can also take it a step further. This is Home for Life by Art Architects, which is actually a zero carbon building over its life cycle of 40 years. So where you also account for the materials that actually have gone into the construction. And you can look only at the materials of construction as architects have done here, and they actually have they've saved 86% of their climate emissions only by looking at the circular economy and how to recycle the materials in the buildings. So as you see, there's a lot of different philosophies, and some architects would actually argue that if only you produce something which is so, spectacular, popular, and durable that people love it and it gets listed from the beginning, that is also an aspect of sustainable architecture. And I would actually agree to some degree. But the real issue here is that when we talk about value, it's both about what are sort of the meanings and the political values, aesthetic, ethic values that architecture represents, but it's also a question of measuring performance. And I think that this is where we really have to achieve something. We also work on the assumption that the values that buildings actually generate, they really grow in time, and we're only beginning to map out what are the actual values that are generated in the life cycle of building. And I think that here in this discussion, levels could be very useful too, because it has this life cycle approach. So we really need to not only looking at the cost and the way we manage resources, but also at the benefits that we generate. This is really a crucial point to us, and looking at value in different dimensions, not only economic value. Yeah. So the really important things is to go through the entire life cycle, from actually when you program the building, when you design it and you build it, and to go back to the crime scene and actually measure up, what actually happens here, both in environmental terms, but also in social and economic terms. What is happening? We need this framework, and I think that levels is really the important first step here. Yeah. So we're beginning to figure out, what are the different tools that we need to document both costs and benefits at different stages of the life cycle. And as you see, I think that there's a very high degree of overlap between what levels propose and sort of a really basic idea of what are the essentials in sustainability reporting here, as you see. So this is sort of levels translated into our way of thinking. So what I think is really important in this testing phase is that we begin to find or discuss, what is this intermediate level that balances complexity and value in the best possible way. And I think that the design of levels that you can work with different levels of detailing is really intelligent. I think that there's a need to develop some digital support tools so that this will be easier to do in practice, and this we still have to do maybe at a national level, also by inviting commercial operators to help us make things easy. This is really crucial for us. And then I think that we really need to work on awareness and figuring out, how can we create the right incentives? Because if no one really asks for this service, it will not happen. And if clients don't pay for this extra, for documenting these extra benefits, of course, it will be pretty difficult to do for architects. So we really need to create this awareness, and we need to be very systematic and methodical about how to document the benefits that levels can do. So that is what I wish for the process, and I am very happy to be able to discuss this further and to possibly contribute during the testing phase. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter Andreas. So just a very quick question to you. Do you think clients are interested in the conclusions drawn from these kinds of projects, and is there something that architects can do to make to translate some of this data into more tangible value?
I think that clients are actually very interested in being able to tell a great, compelling story that will differentiate the project among, the vastness of buildings that are built. So it's really important that you can have a way to say, well, okay, we saved, 50% of carbon emissions, compared to this other building or compared to this standard. And this is why I think that benchmarking is really important, and also something where we need to make all the data on the projects that are reported to level, to make them public so that you can begin to use it as a voluntary framework for benchmarking. There's nothing that incentivizes people so much as sort of being a little bit competitive. But to be competitive, we need to measure up, what is better than what, which solution is best. How can you differentiate? And I think that's really crucial. It's sort of an essential psychological mechanism.
That's really helpful. And I'm sure Josephina will have some things to say about this as well. And I'm aware that we ran a little bit late because of the technical glitches. if you don't mind, we're going to give Josephina 5 more minutes to discuss the pilot, and then if you care to stay in the online, we can have some more questions afterwards. I hope that's okay for for lots of you, and hopefully for the presenters too. Josephina, over to you.
Thank you, Judith. Yes, I have not yet, well, I have presented levels, what it is and who it is spread, how it's been structured, but I have not talked to you about how to test levels yet, and that's what I'm going to do now. So, what we have now, since actually last summer, is something on paper. We call it the beta version of levels. But what we want to do, of course, before we launch this fully and go sort of full speed, is to test it. So I will now talk about the test phase, the objectives and the scope of this test phase, and what do you test, how, why, and who could test. So the testing objectives, or rather the objectives of the test phase, is that in 2 years' time, we want to have a tool which is ready for the market, a tool which has robust indicators and suitable guidance for all the 3 levels that I mentioned to you before. Now, obviously, we have the indicators and we have guidance that comes with them, but we want to make sure that this is actually exactly what is needed. So that's what the test phase will be about. It will run for 2 years. We will also seek to understand from this test phase what are actually the efforts needed to work with levels in terms of resources, timing, and money. I have a lot of questions on that. How long does it take to work with levels? If I want to use those indicators, how much resources do I need to put in? Well, that is something that we cannot answer yet, but we certainly hope that the test phase will give us the answers to those kinds of questions so that we can deliver on those questions in 2 years' time. We also expect to understand better during this test phase what would be the necessary support mechanisms for the implementation of levels in 2 years' time then. So during the testing, it is very important for us, for the Commission, that we have testing projects, that is, projects that are testing the indicators of levels and the guidance that come with it, in different kinds of projects in different parts of Europe, obviously. So what I mean with that is that we need to have a good range concerning the geographical spread of those building projects, that we have both residential buildings and offices on which levels being tested, that again we look at both new build and renovation projects, and that of course that it involves different kinds of building professionals as well. So levels can be tested on either ongoing or finalized building projects where there is sufficient information available. And again, coming back to the question of having a good distribution of projects between office, residential, new build, and major renovation. So what would be tested during the test phase? Well, we haven't gone into details during this webinar about the different indicators. There are about 10 of them. We understand that most building projects will not look at all the different indicators during the test phase. So we have suggested, or we have sort of focused on 5 of those indicators, which we believe are, let's say, from the basis of levels, where we would like most testing projects to work on those indicators. And then the other ones, we certainly need to see that enough building projects are testing them as well. But the 5 ones here listed are the ones which we believe are the core ones. I will not go into detail on those, but we have identified them, and we have some guidance notes specifically, which explains why we believe these are the most important ones for the test phase. How would you do if you're interested in levels? Well, you will actually agree with us, European Commission, to provide certain feedback on your testing. Obviously on the indicators themselves, where we have a specific common reporting format where we would like to collect that information, but also on your general experience, where we would have a specific survey which would pick up some of those aspects. So, for example, questions around how much effort did you need to put into it? Did you find the indicators useful? Did you learn anything when you were useful for yourself when you were using the indicators, etc.? And if you commit to provide this kind of feedback to us at the end of your testing, then during your testing, you will access technical support from the Commission side. So we have a technical help desk which is up and running, for example. We host regular webinars. We will have the first one in a few weeks' time. We will have a platform where testers can exchange information, etc. This is again part of our website. I showed you another part in the previous presentation of mine. But on our website, there is very detailed information on how you can participate in the test phase. There is also the place where you can actually register your building project that you wish to include in the test phase, but several different kinds of supporting documents which sort of guides you in deciding, do I want to test? And if I do want to test, what is it that I want to test? And at what level? And how should I do that? So there's plenty of short documents. These are all a couple of pages only, where you can get more hands-on information on that. Why would you choose to test? Well, when I talk to building professionals which are involved in the test phase, they list a number of different reasons. They see it as a way of developing knowledge and skills in areas which they see as clearly emerging policy areas, and they want to have a key role in shaping the development of what is so far, well, which is the Europe's first policy for environmental performance of buildings, and likely also becoming national policies in many countries. So taking part in the test phase, it's really an opportunity to take part in shaping this kind of policy. But it is also, of course, about improving their own business development acumen and understanding of other green building tools as well, because, as I said, we see levels as a common language for different kinds of tools being used out there. And also, the way that levels has been developed, if you're using levels, you actually assure that buildings are helping to deliver on global as well as regional priorities, because we have, of course, taken into account different kinds of, for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals when we develop levels, just as well as the major bigger policy initiatives in Europe when it comes to circular economy, energy efficiency, etc. So just to say that any organization managing or taking part in a building project can test levels. You just need to be willing to provide us with the feedback. We are not selecting projects. You don't have to apply and get selected. We are so keen on having all kinds of different building projects, regardless of what life cycle stage they may be active at right now or where they are located in Europe, to take part in this testing. So on the website, which I showed you before, you will find out how you can register or how you can send in questions to ask us more about would my building project be useful for testing. There are lots of frequently questions and answers there as well to those. So please have a look at our website, read a bit on the support documents to see what would be necessary to test in order for your building project to test. Discuss within your consortium if you would be willing to provide this kind of feedback, and sign up. And you will, as I said before, you will receive support from us, technical support during the test phase. And in return, of course, we want to hear what you thought about it. I think that's it from my side. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Many thanks, Josephina. Excellent introduction. A question from the audience. Who or which institution is going to manage the level system when the test phase will be closed? Is it going to be DG Environment? Is it going to be a contractor?
Yes, so as I said before, we are not setting up a database on the Commission side. And neither are we providing certification of any sort. So in a certain way, there will be no we're managing of this common language from the Commission side. Now, in the beginning, of course, there would have to be managing and follow up and making sure that it is indeed functioning the way it was developed to do. So there it will have to be, I would assume, the same organizations that have developed it, which is DG Environment being the responsible for it, together with DG Grow. But then in the long run, it is not supposed to be something which need to be managed as such from our side. If we see that the way it is being used, this would need more, this would require more hands-on support from the Commission. This is something that we would have to discuss at that point in time then.
Okay, great. Someone was asking where they can download levels and have full access of it. So I think there's a link in your presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. I believe in the first presentation, the one that I had in the beginning of this webinar, there is a link to the website, and there you can find, I don't know if I can very quickly go back, or do I need to click through all of them?
Yes, you would, I'm afraid. I think it's easier if we just circulate the web link to everyone again.
Yes. So in any case, in my initial presentation, there is a link, and if you go there, I can go back.
Yeah,
it is on slide 12 actually in this pack. I don't know if that helps anyone. It is on the concluding slide in my first presentation this morning. There is a link where you will find all our different kinds of information. So you will find the longer documents where you'll see what levels is and how it works, and very, very precise information on how to use it. But you will also find the places where you'll have where to register, how you do that, and the different supporting documents, short supporting documents for the test phase. So everything is on that website actually.
Excellent. So there's one more question from Stefano. How levels can work with sustainability schemes like LEED, BREEAM, DGNB, etc.?
Yes, so we are in close contact with those certification schemes, of course. And as I mentioned in the beginning, European schemes have been very much involved in the development stage or development phase of levels, and we've been working in close contact with them. Because for them, it was very important from the beginning that levels could be something which where they could pick up the core indicators and use them in their own certification schemes. That was actually something that they came to ask us for before we started with the development of levels. They said we would like to be comparable on some core indicators, and we would like the Commission to support us and the sector as such to develop those kinds of indicators, or identify rather those kinds of indicators. So that has been one important reason for developing levels, but certainly not the only one, not at all. But this means that we are now seeing how, for example, DGNB already last summer in their new revision, they have included a number of the levels indicators in their new scheme, or in their revised scheme, so they're already making use of those indicators. We also know from BREEAM Global that in their next revision, they will be looking at how to include a number of the levels indicators as well, because they see this as very useful for them. So they are also keen on seeing how how the test phase will work out, of course. So we are working very closely with them indeed.
One more question, Josefina, from Heine Lippe. Is there an idea to integrate the embodied energy issues more as in common systems? I think embodied energy is already included.
Yeah, we're already including embodied energy. So I wonder perhaps if the person who asked this question maybe hasn't looked fully into the levels indicators, which I totally understand. But just to assure you then that the embodied energy is indeed included in one of the indicators. We are looking at the life cycle global warming potential, and of course there the embodied energy is included. That's an important part
of levels, I would say. Okay, so we've heard a wonderful range of perspectives on levels and a lot of detailed insights and overviews. And so I would like to apologize again for the technical glitches and for the time we took to fix them. And many thanks to everyone for sticking with us. And also many thanks to all the speakers today. I hope you enjoyed the session and that you will find ways for you and your colleagues to join the pilot. And with that, over and out from us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Judith. Thank you, everybody. I think it was a great webinar with a lot of very interesting information. Thank you, everybody.